Good morning. I'm continuing to talk about the Dhammapada, and now I'm going to move from the first section, which were the twin verses, to the second section. And this section has got different translations for the title. So Sangharakshita has it as mindfulness, I was interested in that because the Jack Austin version has it as watchfulness. So the Jack Austin version is the one I've been talking about so far. Calls it watchfulness. So I was interested to look up a translation of the Dhammapada that has both English and Pali or Sanskrit. And Radhakrishnan does just that. And the word being translated is pramada. So then I went to Sangharakshita's book on Know Your Mind and thought I'd look up what pramada meant, and it's heedlessness or unconcern. And he begins with a quote from the Abhidharma Samuccaya. It is to persevere in passion, lust, aversion, hatred, and ignorance, aggravated by laziness. It is not to attend to what is positive, and so also is not to protect the mind from those things which cannot provide lasting satisfaction. So he goes on to say, we have seen that one can give way to laziness at any point before stream entry. When one stops making an effort in response to the pull of the unconditioned, one is effectively giving way to the pull of the conditioned. We may have the sense that we want to stay just where we are for a while, but this is impossible. If we aren't moving forward, we're slipping back. If we persist in this course, there comes a point where we let go completely. We cease to offer any resistance at all to the kleshas. We just don't care anymore about what is happening. This is heedlessness or pramada. It's a sort of lack of responsibility towards oneself. We no longer bother to protect the mind from negative mental events. We let everything slide. It's like someone who lets themselves go, who stops taking care of their appearance. One becomes a spiritual slattern, ethically down at heel. So I think that's very descriptive of this word heedlessness, which is really what this section is about. So I'm going to talk about one of the verses here, and I'm going back to the Jack Austin, who calls it watchfulness. And in this particular verse he says, watchful among the thoughtless, awake among the sleepers, the wise man advances like a racer, leaving behind the hack. So, watchfulness, being awake rather than asleep. And we know that often the word Buddha is sometimes described as one who is awake. So in what way could we be more awake? I think we take it for granted that we're awake while we're not asleep. But actually we are very often mentally asleep. And it's very easy to simply want, I suppose, an easy life really. We want things to be easy. I think that's why sometimes it's very hard for people who come along to the Buddhist Centre to persist in meditating or really take it further than just coming on a course, because there are so many options out there that seem maybe easier. We're being told that actually you can transform yourself, you can have everything you want just by whatever the promise is. But actually it takes a lot of effort to really change ourselves if we decide that's what we want to do. It takes a lot of determination and energy. So I think Sangharakshita, in that section I just read out, really describes, kind of makes you uncomfortable hearing it, because actually a lot of the time we can be quite lazy, and that's a very strong thing that he said. There's no staying still, there's only slipping back. So what is this sort of effort that we're asked to make? I don't think it's the effort of trying hard. I don't think that is what he's talking about. It's more like a dedication to being fully alive in the world. Yes, I think yesterday I talked about guarding one's senses. It's really about making choices and realising that in every moment we do have choices. It doesn't always feel like that. We can amble through life without really being alert to the choices that are there in every moment. And we're talking about a choice to be aware or to not be aware, to be mindful or not mindful. I know that when I'm not mindful, I'm more likely to have an accident. I'm more likely to be somewhere other than I am, be in my mind elsewhere than what I'm actually doing. That's when I'm less mindful. And I think it's very interesting that when we're fully engaged with what we're doing, that it's inevitably a pleasurable thing, that whatever it is that we're doing. So to be fully engaged is watchfulness, to be fully engaged. So what are we fully engaged in? Well, if we decide that we want to follow a Buddhist path, we're fully engaged in practicing the precepts. I think sometimes we can think of the precepts as being rather a basic practice. We've heard of more interesting things, but actually the first of those precepts, as we know, is about kindness, is about loving kindness. And really, if we just practice that all our life, that would be enough. That would be more than enough if we practiced real kindness. Because we're driven by greed and hatred and delusion, as we know, in a way, we would need to be heedful, we would need to be watchful, we would need to be mindful in order to overcome that greed, that hatred, that delusion, what goes on in our mind, perhaps we think is very private and affects how we behave in the world, with selfishness, with putting ourselves first all the time. So yes, if we really apply ourselves, if we applied ourselves to simply being kind to ourselves, to others, to the world, and by that I mean noticing when we're not being quite kind. So if I just a really basic example just occurred to me then. So let's say, for example, that I'm in a bit of a hurry. I've got a lot of things on my mind and I've got a lot of things to do. And I'm putting on the washing machine. And I'm putting things into the machine, putting clothes into the machine. I mean, this is something that really has happened to me. And because I find those things difficult, because of how I am physically, a few things drop on the floor rather than going from the bag into the machine. Now, this is a very simple thing, isn't it? And immediately there's a kind of tightness within myself and a resistance to what's happening. And so that I can make that situation, and it's only a matter of seconds, into an unkind action. So, then I've got the things up eventually and I've put them in the machine, I've slammed the door. And then I notice my state of mind. My state of mind is not kind, not gentle, not patient. So in that moment, I have been heedless. Basically, I've not been aware enough. So even that, to an inanimate object, I have drawn out of myself a lack of kindness. How much more relevant it is when we're in communication with other people, when we're dealing with our children, or somebody on the phone who we don't feel is cooperating or doesn't understand what we're needing, or whatever it is. We have opportunities in every moment to be mindful, to be heedful, to be watchful. And I think when I first started noticing the truth of this has been in the past when I've been on solitary retreat. And I've noticed that even alone, even completely on my own, I can be unkind, I can be intolerant, impatient, and when I've noticed that, when I've really noticed that, that's drawn attention to the fact that this has got nothing to do with anybody else. My states of mind are my own responsibility. So this image of the wise man advances like a racer, leaving behind the hack, when he's watchful among the thoughtless and awake among the sleepers. Advances like a racer, leaving behind the hack. And it just made me think of a thoroughbred horse, with its beautiful glossy coat and long tail, striving forward. And I think it's rather a lovely image, that sleek, beautiful beast flying along. And, in a way, it's telling us that we too can be that wonderful if we put in the effort. So that ramble is all for today, and see you again soon.